I'm Stephen Scheuer, welcoming you to another in our series of oral histories in which we are fortunate indeed to be able to interview those persons who have helped shape the style and substance of television and our major media today.
Back in March 2002, devoted viewers of Nightline were concerned that after 22 years and thousands of broadcasts, they had seen the end of this distinguished ABC News series. Bill Carter of the New York Times sounded this alarm in the headline, "Koppel is the odd man out as ABC woos Letterman." The story quoted an unnamed executive. They're always unnamed, aren't they?
When they have something like that to say, yes.
Who said, quote, "The relevancy of Nightline just is not there anymore," unquote. You responded a few days later through an op-ed piece in the Times, which many felt was remarkably constrained. Can you tell us now what was going on off-camera between you and ABC News at the time and the state of your own blood pressure?
Well, let me put it this way, Mort. Fortunately, I'm blessed with very low blood pressure. I mean, it's under control. And it didn't get out of control during that period either. And Bill Carter's story was exceptionally accurate in that the reasons that ABC had for doing that in the first place were purely economic. And I had no trouble with that. I have no illusions, as I said in that same op-ed. I know I'm not working for a charitable organization. It's a business. And while they have made a lot of money on Nightline over the past 22 years and continue to make a reasonable amount of money on Nightline, they believed that they could make a great deal more by bringing David Letterman over to ABC. I understand that. I have no problem with that. But I thought it was gratuitous for that still unnamed executive to say what he or she did. And that got my Irish up a little bit. So I felt that it was important that if the Letterman thing did not go through and if Nightline was to stay on ABC, that very senior representatives of this organization publicly express what I hoped would be their real view about Nightline, which they did. And we're back to status quo ante.
Where do we stand right now? Is there any, there is a new commitment, correct?
Yes.
Between you and ABC, which would, does satisfy you temporarily?
Oh, it satisfies me. Look, I mean, one of the reasons that it was understandably difficult for them to give a public commitment of that kind is that, as you well know, as someone who's spent a lot of your life in television, networks don't normally give commitments to television programs. Indeed, they never give commitments to television programs. So ironically, we're in a better position now than we were in January or February of this year. As we discovered at the time, our lifespan could have been as brief as a few more weeks. Now we have a guarantee of significantly longer than that.
How much longer?
None of your business.
Who was young Ted Koppel then? Who were your parents, your friends, mentors? What kind of kid were you?
Well, at age 13, or at least in the years leading up to 13, you tend not to have many mentors outside your own family. I had spent 3 years in an English boarding school by the time we came over to the United States. And my parents were German Jewish refugees who had fled Hitler in the late 30s, and I was born in England after they married. At least they assure me it was after they married. And those first 13 years, I mean, I must say, for me, my life really begins after I came to the United States. That's when I truly began to enjoy myself.
Boarding school. You tell the story in off-camera, private thoughts made public. You flash back to the English boarding school where you tell the story of being one of only 2 Jews in the school, attending Church of England services on Sunday morning and chapel all other evenings, which were required. You write, "It seemed reasonable enough to us at the time. It never occurred to me that there was any anti-Semitism at work here, nor do I think there was now. It was simply a private matter that I was expected to deal with on my own." How did you deal with it?
Well, it's curious, Mort, because to this day, there are many of those hymns that are among my favorite hymns. I spent 3 years going to Church of England services. I'm intimately familiar with the Church of England liturgy, and I dealt with it the way that most 11, 12, and 13-year-olds deal with things like that. There were no options involved. You went to church. That was understood.
I went military school.
Yeah, well, then you dealt with that, right?
In the same book, writing at the same time, you remembered fellow students sending you to Coventry, quote, "a form of loneliness," you said, "that is both painful and conducive to introspection." What was that about?
My parents were back in Germany at the time. My father was trying to reacquire some of the things that the Nazis had taken away from him, including a home and a factory. And they did not want me, for obvious reasons, to be going to school in Germany, and so I went to boarding school in England. And I made the mistake of coming back from one vacation with some little Schuco toy cars. And I was bragging about those cars and pointing out that I thought they were infinitely superior to what were called the dinky cars. And I think quite understandably, I mean, this was probably 1951. It was only 6 years after the end of the Second World War. I think quite understandably, my fellow students there didn't take too kindly to this kid coming back from Germany and saying, "Look at that, the Germans have got better cars than the Brits do."
Did they feel you were, did they speak to you? What is Coventry?
Oh, Coventry means nobody talks to you. I think I was in Coventry for about 2 weeks. When you're that age, 2 weeks is a long time not to have anybody talk to you.
And who determines when Coventry is over? Those who
impose it. That's right. I mean, you can't. There's no point in trying to end it yourself. In fact, the more you try to end it, the longer it's going to last.
At 13 in the Jewish faith, the customary phrase is that you've become a man. This is the year when you and your family come to the United States. Did you feel that you were at least on the path of what is known as manhood, of Menschlichkeit? Starting life in a new culture is a daunting task for anyone.
This is, and has been for many, many years, an extraordinarily blessed country. We deal quite routinely in this country, and most of us, I mean, there are people who have very little, but most Americans have much more than anybody else in any other country of the world. Even our lower middle class is wealthier in many respects than people who are considered to be quite well off in a lot of other countries around the world. And some of that reaches the point of wretched excess. I mean, I remember my father giving me whatever the the price was in those days, I think it was probably a quarter to go and buy the Sunday Times. And I went to some local newsstand to pick up the Times, and the news vendor gave it to me, and I said, no, I only need one copy. And he said, well, that is one copy. Well, as people in New York well know, and as people around the country may not appreciate, a New York Times in New York on a Sunday probably weighs 6 or 7 pounds. With all the advertising, it is several hundred pages. I had never seen a newspaper like that.
That'll give you a tennis elbow.
It sure will. I remember during the first week we were in the States, my mother coming in to find me sitting on the hotel bed. And in those days they didn't have television in the rooms, but they did have radios, and I'd just been listening to the radio, and she found me crying on the bed, and she said, what's the matter? And I said, I can't believe what kind of a country we've come to here. And she said, what do you mean? And I had just heard an ad for brioskis, and I still remember the jingle. It was, eat too much, drink too much, try brioskis, try brioskis. Well, as I say, this was about, by then it would have been 8 years after the end of the Second World War. We had rationing in England for some commodities until 1952. I remember sugar, for example, and candy were rationed until 1952. So I had just left a country where they were still rationing and had just come to a country where the only thing that people could think to do if they had eaten too much or drunk too much was to take some kind of a medicine for it. And I said, why don't they just eat less or drink less? Then they won't get upset stomachs. I mean, that seemed like a much simpler solution and would have saved a lot of money all around. But, you know, I quickly adapted.
You earned a degree where this interview will repose and be used by students, and an MA in Mass Communications, Research, and Political Science at Stanford. Did these years help shape your decision to seek a career in journalism? And if not, what did? Was there a sudden epiphany or?
No, the epiphany had happened long before, Mort. The epiphany had happened at a very, very early age. I had decided I wanted to be a journalist when I was still in single figures. I mean, I have early memories, although I can't, as I look back on it now, I can't have paid all too much attention to it, but it clearly had an impact. I have early memories of my father listening to Edward R. Murrow on the BBC. He had, as you know, he was over there for CBS Radio, but his broadcasts were considered to be so of such propaganda value to the British people, who were going through a very, very bad time, obviously, that many of them were rebroadcast on the BBC, and my father listened to these broadcasts avidly. And from earliest childhood on, I remember thinking, you know, this seems like a pretty neat way to make a life. And the idea of being able to travel all around the world, talk to the most interesting people in the world, and to do it all on somebody else's nickel, that sounded good. And I've never deviated from that over the past, whatever it is now, 57, 58 years.
And not regretted it?
Haven't regretted it for a moment.
Good.
I came out of Stanford in 1962 with a master's degree and thought that the New York Times would just be tripping all over itself to want to hire me. And indeed they were. They were willing to hire me as a copy boy, which is what desk assistants were called in those days. And it would have been at $60 a week, which I was, well, I mean, it wasn't a lot of money even back in 1962, but I was content to do that. And then I had a conversation with one of the editors, and I said, well, tell me, how long do you think it'll be before I can rise from being a copy boy to actually writing something? And he said, well, if you're very good, it'll be 3 years. Well, I was just on the verge of getting married, and my wife was a New York City school teacher at that time. And I really didn't see how I was going to make it on $60 a year with a family, or $60 a week with a family. So I took this job at WMCA, where they paid me the princely sum of $90 a week. And that was a good learning experience. I mean, there were some terrific reporters at that station. One of them, a fellow by the name of Danny Meenan, was probably about as good a police reporter as any around, and Danny took me under his wing, and the news director at the time was a fellow by the name of Cam Cornell, and New Yorkers will have probably heard his daughter Irene Cornell on WCBS many, many times over the past 40 years. So I was quite content at WMCA. But then one day I was sent to cover a neo-Nazi rally in Yorkville. And I did a pretty good interview with the head Nazi, in which he in his speech had denounced President Kennedy's the domination of President Kennedy's cabinet by all these Jews. And I said, we kind of ticked through the cabinet, and I said, which of the many Jews on President Kennedy's cabinet did you have in mind? Did you have the Jew Robert McNamara in mind, or was it Dean Rusk, or were you thinking perhaps of his national security advisor, McGeorge Bundy? And as we went through the entire cabinet, I think there may have been one or two Jews on the cabinet, but there surely weren't more than that. And WMCA was very pleased with that interview and played it several times, and was encouraged enough to say, do you want to do more of those interviews? And I said, sure, you bet. And then one day, AFTRA, the American Federation of Television and Radio Artists, called up management at WMCA and said, if he's going to be on the air, he's got to be a member of AFTRA. And they came back to me and said, you got to join the union. And I said, that's fine, I'll be happy to do that. What do I have to do? Well, it was simple. I had to pay $350 initiation fee, and I was a member. Now, that was a month's salary before taxes. But I paid it, and then after, my new union came back and said, that's fine, but if you're going to have him on the air, you've got to pay him union scale. And that would have been, at the time, roughly a doubling, maybe more, of my salary. And WMCA said, well, let's see, the option is we have him on the air and we have to pay him a couple of $100, or we don't have him on the air and we don't have to pay him anything. So they took me off the air. So now I was an AFTRA member. I was out $350 and I couldn't get on the air. So that's when I started looking rather more seriously for a new job, and ultimately found this job with ABC.
You sent out your bio, your resume, and so forth?
No. Actually, one of the, as they were then called, one of the WMCA good guys. He was a DJ by the name of Jim Harriet, and he had heard that ABC Radio was starting a new broadcast called Flair Reports. And he said, I think they're still looking for a couple of guys. Why don't you go over and audition? So I did, and I did rather well. I mean, they said, that was terrific. I mean, you sound good, we like your writing. The only problem is you're 23 years old. I mean, we can't possibly hire you as an ABC correspondent. And I said, well, this is radio. Nobody's going to know unless you introduce me every day by saying, and now here is 23-year-old Ted Koppel. Why should they know? And they said, no, we just can't. But they did offer me a job as a news writer at $175 a week, which seemed like an awful lot of money. But I turned them down and said, that's not the job I applied for, and I think I'm qualified for that on-air job, and that's the job I want. And I went home. By then I was married. And we had a baby on the way, and I said to my wife, I think I just blew it. I think I just blew a $175 a week job. But she was very supportive and said, look, you did what you thought was the right thing. And 3 days later, the producer called up and said, all right, we've thought it over. Come on over. And that job paid $270 a week. Well, have made bigger salaries in the years since then, but none ever seemed bigger than that one. That was huge.
You must recall some of your earliest on-camera pieces in which you got to say, "This is Ted Koppel, ABC News."
Yeah, well, on camera wasn't something that happened until 3.5 years later, because I was doing radio, and but that was nevertheless a big kick. And I did a late night newscast. They assigned me, in addition to doing this program, Flair Reports, which was what I began doing. I was quickly given a 15-minute newscast at 10:55 p.m. So I've always been a late night kind of guy. It was called I think it was World Wrap-Up. And I got a big kick doing that.
What kind of organization was ABC News at the time? It was shortly after the post-Murrow era at CBS, Huntley Brinkley and white paper documentary era, NBC News. Howard K. Smith, whom we were fortunate enough to, I think, have the last comprehensive interview with him for this series, told us that ABC was still, at the time he went over to ABC after the Paley dispute, was still a network news unit seeking parity, let alone a signature. Would you agree?
Well, I think Howard, as he was inclined to do, was being very kind. ABC was fourth in a three-network race. ABC, as a news organization, just barely existed. I think in those days, it's probably no exaggeration to say that the annual budget for ABC News would be unacceptable as the salary for a network anchorman today. They didn't give the network, did not give the news division a whole lot of money, but the good news there was that it left the news division with considerable freedom. Nobody really cared what we covered. And so we were free to cover those stories that we thought were most important. In other words, that was before the day that networks discovered that news programs could actually turn a profit. And since they weren't worried about turning a profit, there was no particular pressure to do stories on, little 7-year-olds who were murdered or former football stars who were accused of murder. You could actually do stories on the economy, you could do stories on foreign policy, you could do stories on important issues, in other words. And in those days we did, to the exclusion of just about everything else.
Vietnam. Did you believe Vietnam to be a tragic, futile endeavor, as many did? And if so, if you did, when did you make this perception?
Well, I went to Vietnam for the first time in January of 1967. I went for a year. And then came back in late 67, spent 68 in the States, covering Central and Latin America, covering civil rights stories in the South here. And then in 69, I was sent out to be bureau chief in Hong Kong. I think that my perception of Vietnam was very much influenced by an interview that I did in 1964, actually, with 3 colleagues. David Halberstam, who was then working for the New York Times, Neil Sheehan, who was then the UPI correspondent, and Malcolm Brown, who was the Associated Press correspondent, all of them covering Vietnam. And they were all back, and I did a 1-hour radio documentary with the 3 of them on this evolving, what was then still very much an evolving war in Vietnam. And much of what they told me then turned out to be absolutely true, and they had a much clearer vision, I think, of what was happening in Vietnam and what was going to happen. And I found when I went to Vietnam myself in early '67, I found myself discovering many of the things that they had discovered a couple of years earlier. So, yeah, fairly, I'd say from mid-67 on, I had very few illusions about Vietnam, or that ultimately the United States would have to withdraw. I didn't think that was a war that could be won. And I covered the Nixon campaign through the election, and thought I was going to be, when he won, I thought I was going to become ABC's White House correspondent. And I was called in by the then President Bill Sheen, who said, look, you've done a terrific job, and I'm going to give it to you straight. There is nothing wrong with your reporting, but you're 28 years old, and you look about 21. And I just can't put you in the White House. You're just too young. You need some more seasoning. But I will give you the job of Southeast Asian Bureau Chief if you're willing to go back out to Hong Kong. Well, my wife and kids had been living in Hong Kong when I was in Vietnam. And we were all very fond of Hong Kong, loved living out there. I was just beginning to feel, after a year in Vietnam, that I knew what it was about. So I was actually kind of eager to go back and resume covering that story.
In '75, you anchored ABC's Saturday Night News, am I correct?
I did.
And your diplomatic assignments as well included coverage of former Secretary of State Henry Kissinger, which your CV says took you more than 250,000 miles during that time of shuttle diplomacy.
Yeah, I think that 250,000 miles covered more than just covering Kissinger. But yes, there was a year in which I did 250,000 miles. That was a lot of traveling.
I don't mean to get off on a lighter note, but I've read that you do a terrific Henry Kissinger impersonation.
Yes, that'll be for some other time when you and I have something more powerful than water sitting on the...
On November 4th, 1979, during Jimmy Carter's presidency, a group of armed men stormed the American embassy in Tehran and took, I think it was 65 employees hostage. Where were you on that Sunday?
I was home. Got a call from the desk and said, look, a bunch of radical students have seized the U.S. Embassy, and we'd like you to come in, do a story. And what few people remember now is that just a few months previous, a bunch of radical students had seized the embassy, or had tried to, and the then ambassador had come out, talked to them, sent them home, and nothing had happened. So I said, look, this thing's going to be over in a couple of hours. It was Sunday. I didn't want to go in. And I said, I think this thing will be over before I get into the State Department, so why don't you just forget about it? And the guy on the desk said, no, we really think, you know, there's nothing much else going on today. We need you to come in and do that story. And as history was to prove, I was right. It didn't last long at all, just 444 days.
This is ABC News Nightline. Reporting from Washington, Ted Koppel.
Good evening. This is a new broadcast in the sense that it is permanent and will continue after the Iran crisis is over. There will also be nights when Iran is not the major story, when we'll bring you briefly up to date on Iran, but we'll focus on some other story. That's not the case tonight. Again, today, Iran is the major story, and for the first time on television, we'll provide the opportunity for the wife of an American hostage to speak live with an Iranian official.
Why are we not being allowed to hear from the hostages? Why are we not corresponding with them? Why are there so few phone calls coming out? Why isn't there mail coming out of that embassy in Tehran?
Well, perhaps one reason is because your CIA is so sophisticated. You know, look at Canada, the way they got some of the people whom perhaps we didn't have anything really against them out from Iran. I think really the security measure is the main reason behind this. In fact, not I think, I believe that.
Why then, if you think the State Department, don't you let a third party in?
You should.
A Swiss or someone, why are there not photographs being taken and sent out of all the hostages? Why do we only see a few?
You see, I do not know about that. I sincerely do not know the answer to that.
Roone Arledge was then president of News, and he was beseeching the network to agree to an open-ended late-night time slot, A, and B, particularly on a crisis, which, as we say, didn't last for a couple of days or whatever.
Sure. Roone wasn't the kind to beseech. Roone was smarter than that. He had actually wanted a one-hour newscast at 6:30 in the evening. He wanted the 6:30 to 7:30 slot. And there was no way that the affiliates were going to give up that valuable 7 to 7:30 time slot in which they could run syndicated programming and make a ton of money. But Roone is sort of a guerrilla fighter of network bureaucracy. And he had it in mind that if he couldn't get that hour broadcast consecutively, then he would simply take half an hour in the early evening and try to get half an hour late at night. And for some months already, he had been setting us up in the news division that whenever there was a major event that happened, he would seize that half hour at 11:30 at night and do a special. I remember we did a special when Elvis Presley died. We did a couple of specials when the Pope came to visit. There were any number of other stories, but what he was really looking for was a story with legs, a story that would last. And so I believe it was, as you correctly say, the hostages were taken on November 4th. I think it was probably about November 8th. When Roone said, we're going to do a late-night special on this. And we did a late-night special on the 8th, and the 9th, and the 10th, and the 11th, and the 12th, and the 15th, and the 20th, and the 25th. And I remember one day getting on the phone with him and saying, Roone, you know, there is nothing happening today. We got nothing to say tonight. We shouldn't be doing a special tonight. He said, do it anyway. Tell me what an Ayatollah is. Tell me what the difference is between a Shia and a Sunni Muslim. I don't care what you do, just put on a half hour. And what he was really doing is he had seized that time period, and he wasn't going to let it go again. And the hostage crisis went on and on and on, and ABC was losing a ton of money because these were all specials, and they couldn't sell advertising on these specials. They had to declare their intention to do a regularly scheduled program before they could sell it. And that is how Nightline was born in March of 1980, which would
March
be
24th.
March 24th, so it would be November to December to January to February, 4 months later, about 4.5 months after we began. Nightline went on the air as a permanent broadcast, and now they could sell advertising, and the hostage crisis went on for almost another year.
Does Roone come to you and say, now you look old enough, or what?
Oh, I think he's probably worried that I'm starting to look a little too old for it now. You know, it doesn't take long.
Tom Shales, as you recall. The Washington Post television reviewer, not exactly your touchy-feely critic, called the show, the opening broadcast, cheaply theatrical, mawkish and self-promotional, neo-news, non-news, pseudo-news, a sugar news substitute, news dressed up in a clown suit and paraded in the center ring. How did you and your staff react to that kind of notice?
Oh, I have learned over the years not to complain, certainly not to television critics. But I called Tom and I said, I thought that was a cheap shot. You didn't even give us a chance to get off the ground. I mean, that's our first program of what we hope is going to be a permanent series. And I think, in all fairness, you owe it to us to give it another look. And Tom, who actually is a very sensitive guy and a very decent guy, promised that he would do that. And I think about 5 or 6 months later, he came back with a rave review. It was one of the nicest reviews I've ever had. You know, again, I didn't have any complaint about what he had to say. I was just concerned about the timing. You don't just go after a new program based on what a bunch of very nervous people do on the first night. You got to give it at least a few nights.
Including chefs, restaurant critics give you at least a week.
I would think.
Well, Scheuer's review, as you suggest, was 9 months after that first review. He was now writing, Nightline represents the most successful programming initiative in ABC News history. What makes Nightline click is Koppel's bullseye interviewing style, a verbal and rhetorical combination of Sugar Ray Leonard and Baryshnikov, a succession of jabs, rejoinders, and judicious to delicious interruptions. Koppel a cappella, unquote Tom Schell's next time around.
What do you want to quit now for? I mean, keep going. Don't you have the rest of the review?
But I recall viewers really depended upon you and Nightline to tell them what was going on with the crisis.
Well, that was just before CNN began. I think CNN went on the air in 1980. So back then there was no 24-hour cable news, and if people wanted to know what was happening between the hours that the evening news broadcasts went off the air and the time that we came on at 11:30, we were it.
The crisis ended when?
The Iranians were quite literally waiting. They did not want to release the hostages to Jimmy Carter. And they waited until the very moment that Ronald Reagan took the oath of office. And there had to have been someone in Washington or in the United States on a cell phone or on a regular phone to Tehran saying, okay, he's not the president anymore. Reagan's in, Carter's out. And at that moment, they allowed the plane with the hostages to take off. Did you have an affair with Ms. Rice?
Mr. Koppel, I was asked a question last spring, which I refused to answer, and your clips showed that. If the question is, in the 29 years of my marriage, including 2 public separations, have I been absolutely and totally faithful to my wife? I regret to say the answer is no. But I also am never going to answer any specific questions about any individual. I have no privacy. My wife has privacy, and other innocent people have privacy. And I don't care what questions are asked tonight or any time in the future. I'm not going to answer them on any specific instance. Now, I've been forced to make a declaration here that I think is unprecedented in American political history, and I regret it. That question should never have been asked.
The question is frequently raised, you know, why didn't you guys in the press do the same thing with Jack Kennedy, who was probably just as randy in his way as either Gary Hart or Bill Clinton. Well, I wouldn't describe FDR as having been randy. I mean, he had an affair, but these guys, you know, they had multiple relationships. And in the wake of Vietnam, and in the wake of Watergate, and in the wake of many of the things that had happened in the late 60s, there simply was no longer the willingness to give people the kind of leeway that had been given to them in the 40s or 50s or even the early 60s. And Gary Hart was the first victim of that. But he was a victim of his own design. What had happened was this was in a square behind police headquarters in Pristina. And we had just spent the morning going through police headquarters, which by then had been abandoned, and the police had set fire to many of the documents that were in there. And there was a small open-air cafe in the square behind the police headquarters, and there were a couple of customers sitting there, and so I asked them if they would mind if I sat down and talked to them. and they were both Serbs. And I asked them about what had happened to the Kosovar Albanians. And one man in particular kept insisting to me that the Albanians, the Kosovar Albanians, the ethnic Albanians, who were the victims of a number of atrocities, and indeed I had just come the day before from seeing a mass grave opened up in which there had been the bodies of women and children.
The people are not to blame. It's the regime which is to blame. Serb and Albanian as well.
What does that mean? I don't understand. I'm asking him what happens when he faces the first KLA soldier who comes up to him and says, "This is what I'm telling you happened to our women, to our young men, to our villages, to our homes." You're going to look him in the eye and say, "No, none of that happened. It's not true."
If I see him on the street, I will respect him, but he wouldn't respect me. I would feel sorry for him, but the people are not to blame. It's the regime.
Look, tell him that I know when I get a direct answer and I know when I get bullshit. And this is bullshit. And what had been going through my mind at that point was if I'd been sitting in Berlin in 1945 behind Gestapo headquarters on Albrecht Avenue, and if a German then had told me the same thing about some of the victims of Nazism who had ended up in the concentration camps and had told me that no, in point of fact, German Jews were treated better, that just to say, gee, I'm not sure that's accurate, didn't seem quite strong enough. Bullshit seemed like the appropriate expression, and I used it. And my producer and I talked about whether we should put it on the air that night, and both felt it was just the right word.
When you asked Al Campanis, following up on your other guest, the author of Boys of Summer, Roger Kahn, why there were no black managers, no black general managers, no black owners in Major League Baseball, he responded,
I truly believe that they may not have some of the necessities to be, let's say, a field manager or perhaps a general manager.
You really believe that?
Well, I don't say that they're all of them, but they certainly are short. How many quarterbacks do you have? How many pitchers do you have that are black?
Yeah, but I mean, you know, I got to tell you, that sounds like the same kind of garbage we were hearing 40 years ago about players when they were saying, not really cut out. You remember the days, you know, they hit a black football player in the knees, and you know, no, that really sounds like garbage if you forget me saying so.
It's not garbage, Mr. Koppel, because I played on a college team, and the center fielder was black, and in the backfield at NYU with the fullback who was black. Never knew the difference of whether he was black or white. We were teammates. So it just might be that why are black men or black people not good swimmers? Because they don't have the buoyancy.
There's something else, Mort, that you sort of need to understand as preface to this. And that is that we had invited Al Campanis on the program because he, back in the late 40s, early 50s, I forget exactly when, had been Jackie Robinson's roommate. We brought him on because he was a guy, and that took, in those days, for a white ball player to room with a black ball player, was an act of courage. It was an act of great decency. So my first reaction was just one of absolute shock. And Al Campanis and I met years later. He heard that I was in Los Angeles, and he called me at the hotel and asked if I'd meet him for a cup of coffee. And I said, sure. I mean, I came down fairly hard on him after that statement and tried to give him actually 2 or 3 chances to alter it, redeem himself a little bit, and he kept digging himself in deeper and deeper.
Dig himself out, as he terms it.
And you know, part of the problem was that he was sitting at home plate. It was just after a night game. He had one of these earpieces in. He couldn't see me at the time. He was a man already in his 70s then. But it was also a function, I think, of his generation, that to talk that way would have been perfectly acceptable in the locker room, in the local pub, in the 1950s, or even into the 60s and 70s. It wasn't appropriate anymore in 1987. And we could very easily have had some other official of the Los Angeles Club on who would have been smarter, smoother, who would have known enough not to say that. I mean, I felt kind of sorry for Al Campanis because, as I say, fundamentally I think he was a very decent man. And at the time when it meant the most, he was there. And he quite literally and figuratively stood up to the, stood up at the plate. And was there to be a friend as well as a teammate to Jackie Robinson. But I just couldn't let him say those things and not challenge him on them. And the end result was that a day or two later he was fired.
Wasn't there a happier ending after that? Was it Harry Edwards?
Well, Harry Edwards, who is an African-American sociologist, I think at Berkeley, actually called Al Campanis and asked him if he would come to work with him, and they actually did some very useful work together, and Campanis was very proud of that.
Looking back on the transcript, Campanis apparently was seeking to put the question back on your desk when he asked, how many black anchormen do you have? And you answered, fortunately, there are a few black anchormen, but if you want me to tell you why there aren't any black executives, I'm not going to tell you it's because the blacks aren't intelligent enough. I'm going to tell you it's because whites have been running the establishment of broadcasting just as they've been running the establishment of baseball for too long and seem to be reluctant to give up power. I mean, you said, that's what it finally boils down to, isn't it? Now, I assume you were including all the commercial networks in that response to Mr. Campanis, were you not? Including ABC at that time?
Not just at that time, to this day. It's in some respects, it remains as much of an issue now as it was back in 1987. And look at what we're talking about, 15 years ago, right? We may have a black executive or two at ABC. If we do, I haven't met them. So it's still an issue. And it's still an issue for the same reason. Each group tends to perpetuate itself, and that was bad 15 years ago. It was bad 45 years ago, and it's bad today.
I hope this is not presumptuous, but are you on ABC's case on this situation?
No, I'm not on ABC's case. My responsibility is as managing editor of Nightline, and at Nightline we have a lot of African Americans in prominent positions.
A couple of last questions. The state of broadcast journalism today. At Harvard's Kennedy School of Government a couple of years ago, you answered questions from students and the public about the integrity of the news product. And you said, I frequently argue that television journalism today, this is 2 years back, and print journalism today is better than it's ever been. Simultaneously, unfortunately, it's also worse than it has ever been. We have more good journalism and more bad journalism coexisting, and frequently the bad drives out the good. How do you define bad, and how do you define good?
Well, I think television journalism has a propensity to get into a competition to be first with the obvious. I think also in the wake of 60 Minutes demonstrating that a television news program can be profitable, there has, over the past 25 years, been an enormous amount of pressure for television news programs to make money. You don't make money, for the most part, by covering subjects like the economy, race relations, politics, foreign policy. You're more inclined to make money by covering stories like, the stain on Monica Lewinsky's dress, or stories like, what was the name of the young skating star who smashed her opponent's knee, or the O.J. Simpson story, or, those, or that little girl who was the tiny tot beauty queen who was murdered. Those kinds of stories get a ton of coverage. And some of it is quite good, but a lot of it is just dreadful. And a lot of what is on the air today is just an effort to report what has happened most recently. And what has happened most recently is not necessarily what is most important. The essence of journalism is not covering an event live. The essence of journalism is in the editing process. The essence of journalism has to do with sorting out that which is important from that which is not, for, getting rid of the trivial. We tend to focus on the trivial and ignore the important. Now, there are still a lot of very good television programs on the air. There are still a lot of excellent newspapers being published. But if you have to weigh in terms of just bulk, whether there's more good stuff or more bad stuff, I'd say, unfortunately, there's more bad stuff.
Do you want to cite any brand names, or let the viewer figure that out?
Oh, look, I think, first of all, I think the evening news broadcasts are still very good. I think the magazine programs are capable of doing very good stuff. They feel enormous competitive pressure to do well in the ratings, and therefore end up doing a lot of stories I think they shouldn't be touching. I think the Lehrer News Hour is a terrific broadcast. I think what NPR is doing on Morning Edition, on All Things Considered, on some of their talk programs throughout the day, is among the best broadcasting that I've heard in years. So there's a lot of good stuff. And I'd like to believe that Nightline is still a very good program. And for all that, to get back to where we began, for all that ABC was willing to at least make the attempt to get Letterman to come over, the fact of the matter is they've been very good to Nightline for 22 plus years. I think the fact that a program like Nightline can survive on television, where 22 years is a very, very long time.
We had the pleasure, the privilege of doing what was perhaps the last comprehensive interview with Howard K. Smith before he passed. We asked him how his career at ABC ended, and he answered this.
I resigned when he was there. I was 65. I don't think I had any prospect of doing anything better. And I was rather tired of television. It's really a rat race. It really is. You may know, but I certainly know that it was hard. Ups and downs. You can become famous and be thrown out all in 13 weeks. It's just it's a great strain. Ted Koppel said, it's too bad you can't take the good moments and keep it in a bottle and use it then later on. You can't, and it's too much of a strain. I'm glad to be shed of it. I had a backache. I went to see doctors for much of my life and couldn't cure it. When I left television, suddenly I realized I didn't have a backache anymore. And I haven't had one since.
How's your back?
My back's fine, but it's good to see my old friend Howard again. He was a dear man.
Finally, given all the Sturm und Drang of 40 years at ABC News, Do you still have the same passion when you come into the studio each day?
I do. If I ever stop having the passion, I won't have any trouble leaving it behind.
Is it now the time to say some of those good things out of the bottle, or is it a time for you to put good things into it?
Oh, I think we're still filling the bottle, and as long as there are still extraordinary young men and women who are willing to come and work with me, and as long as we can still keep doing quality programming, and as long as someone is still willing to pay me an outrageous sum of money to go and travel to all the places I want to visit and talk to all the people I want to talk to, I have no complaints.